Hey everyone, my name is Brian McGrory. I'm the editor of the Boston Globe, and we are delighted to have you here. We're really excited about doing this virtual event. It's been an extraordinary time in journalism, all across the country, all across the world. Here at the Globe, we're addressing probably the most sprawling news story that we have ever covered. It's a public health story, it's a healthcare delivery story, it's a political story, it's an economic story, it's a sports story, it's an art story. I mean, you name it. And we have had to throw every resource we have at it from the Globe newsroom. And we're really proud of what we've done. We have seen record readership, record numbers of subscribers, but it's been really challenging. It's been at once really good for the newspaper industry in that we're not alone in seeing the surge in readers. We're people all over the country, news organizations all over the country are seeing the same thing. We have benefited, as I said, from a really strong growth in subscribers, I think more so than most other places in the country. At the same time, though, the newspaper industry has been hit really hard. And advertising has plummeted because of the situation we're in. We're on basically a nationwide lockdown that we're just starting to break out of right now. And so it's been really challenging for news organizations from coast to coast to figure out how to make ends meet and how to fund the journalism that is so vital at this moment. And it's also been really hard on the journalists who are bringing you this story. Over the course of 1 week, late February into early March, basically the biggest story of our careers broke on us, especially here in Boston. That was the timing. And everybody who was on any sort of beat reoriented themselves to covering the coronavirus and the impacts of it. At the same time, for public health reasons, we cleared out of the newsroom. First to second week of March, we made the decision that for the health and safety of our staff and for the health and safety of the community, because we didn't want to be spreading the virus, we had everybody work remotely. So at the same time, we had an entire staff at the Globe working from their dining room tables, living room couches, from their cars, from their basements, on the biggest story we have ever covered. And it's been an extraordinary achievement at the Globe and at other news organizations across the country to have been able to do it in the way we have done it. It doesn't look like there's any let up on this story. It's gradually shifting from a public health story into a financial economic story, a business story. But right now, it's the only story in town, so it's all we're covering. And so we have a really strong panel of Globe staffers here to talk to you today that we're very excited about. We're really sorry that you guys are in the position you are. Being in college, suddenly being forced to learn remotely, to leaving the campuses that I assume you love, is really tough. I've seen it firsthand at home. I've got a college freshman here. She is not happy about being here. We have tried to deal with it successfully, but we really feel for you. And you're in our thoughts, and we hope you can learn something today, and we're interested in hearing your thoughts as well. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Cynthia Needham. Cynthia is a star editor who has been pivotal to our coverage, virtually every aspect of our coverage. She's an assistant managing editor. She oversees something we call our Express Desk, which is our more urgent news, and this has been a very urgent story. She also has a deep background as a business editor, political reporter. So Cynthia, will be leading the panel now. And again, really appreciate your attention here today, and things will get better for you and for everybody else. So thank you very much. Cynthia.
Thanks, Brian. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We're excited to have you here, and I hope we have a good, fun agenda set up with some good insights for you guys, and also some insights into what we've been covering here at the Globe. So the thing about covering a really big event like this is that it can feel really all-consuming, and it doesn't always offer you time to step back and reflect a little bit on the work that you've done. So the nice thing about an event like this for us is that it's offering us a chance to come together and kind of have that conversation in real time. This certainly is not over yet, but it's nice for us to be able to reflect a little bit about what we've been doing. And of course, that's made better by the fact that you all are here. But we also know that you're probably here for a healthy dose of advice at a time when the job market and certainly the journalism market is uncertain at best. So we hope we have some good ideas and advice that we can offer you as well. So quick explainer of how the hour is going to work. A lot of you submitted really terrific questions ahead of time. Thank you for doing that. I went through them. I picked out a bunch that seemed to have some overlap or that came up a lot, and we're going to divide this up into a few parts. We'll start by taking some of those questions about what we're doing and how we're covering the COVID crisis. And then we're going to touch on some questions that are more about advice for you, advice for seniors or people getting into the job market. And then we'll leave a chunk of time for live questions, which once we get going here, you're going to be able to submit them for the next half hour or so. So go ahead and do that. We'd love to hear as the conversation goes on, questions that are sparked for you. And we'll make sure to leave some time to address those. So on a personal note, I'm really excited to be here with this group of journalists. These women, and they are all women, are absolute stars in the newsroom. They all have really different roles, which I think will help them offer sort of a variety of perspectives about what they do and what we're doing as an organization. So let me have everyone turn on their cameras. This is like a big reveal, which is sort of strange. Okay, great. So I'll start with Deanna, who she's in my upper right, but she may be in a different place for all of you. So Deanna is an enterprise and general assignment reporter with the Globe, who I have to say has covered some of our most heartbreaking and best read coronavirus stories over the last 2 months. She's done some incredible deep dives into the hospital communities, into patients that are struggling with this illness, and I hope she'll be able to give some really good thoughts on what she's been up to. Felicia, do you want to wave? So Felicia's day job is that she's a producer on our marijuana vertical, but when this all got started, maybe on day 3 of us really realizing that COVID was going to be a very big story, we had the idea of starting a newsletter, and we thought, well, maybe if we have a coronavirus-related newsletter, people will read it. And it was a little bit of an experiment, and right before we started, Felicia told us that we now have, as of today, 228,000 subscribers to that newsletter. So I think we can officially say it's a success, and I hope Felicia will be able to tell us a little bit about different ways to reach readers. Next up is Heather. Heather Cyrus runs our audience experience team, which is a fancy way of saying it's her job to figure out what is going to make readers want to come to bostonglobe.com. So I always joke that makes her job probably the most important one in the newsroom, since our readers are so incredibly important to us. And last but definitely not least is Katie McInerney. Katie is an assistant sports editor, and I have to say, a just all-around fantastic ideas person. I know a lot of you had sports questions, so we'll make sure that she gets some time to address those, but she also just has great insights about how the newsroom ticks in general. So that's the group. So let's kick off. I'm going to start by asking each of the panelists to tell you a little bit about their background, because I think aspiring journalists tend to like to hear how people got their start, what path they took. So I'll just ask you guys to tell us quickly, what have you been covering, and how did you get here, what you've been covering, and then to lighten the mood, tell us something wacky that's happened to you during lockdown. I will start by noting that because journalism is all about expecting the unexpected, a giant truck just pulled up outside of my house and is doing something with cement out there. So if it gets loud, you may see me shifting where I am, and I apologize. But Deanna, let's start with you.
Hi, so as Cynthia has mentioned, I'm Deanna. I am on the Express desk. I do a lot of enterprise stories, news features about pretty much anything. I graduated from Ohio State in 2012. I didn't major in journalism, but I did a ton of internships at various publications, from newspapers to NPR to magazines. I started my postgraduate career at Mother Jones magazine as an editorial fellow, mostly fact-checking big investigative features for the magazine in San Francisco, and writing kind of like quick hit posts for the website, things like that. After that, I worked at an alt weekly in Spokane, Washington. And from there, I was a reporter mostly covering education for the Post and Courier in Charleston, South Carolina. And I joined the Boston Globe almost a year to the day ago. And it's been great. Obviously, it's been all coronavirus coverage all the time since about mid-March. So I think my first story about coronavirus actually was published on January 31st, which kind of gives you, you know, a sense of how long this has really been going on, despite the fact that we've maybe only been paying attention to it in the public, at least, since early March. And let's see, what was the funniest, weirdest thing to happen to me in lockdown? I don't know. We've just been, I live with my husband and my little dog. We've just been cooking a lot, trying to get out as much as possible. Nothing really funny. I did turn 30 recently, which was kind of not how I wanted to, not how I ever envisioned celebrating my 30th birthday. Kind of just sitting around the TV watching, I don't know, like random shows on Disney Plus. So not necessarily funny, just a little bit depressing. So sorry, I don't have any interesting stories that way.
No, that's a great start. Thank you. Heather.
Hello, I'm Heather Cyrus. As Cynthia mentioned, I'm the Director of Audience Experience, which is a new job and a newer team at the Globe. The audience engagement team is about 3-ish years old, and my job sort of marries audience engagement and digital storytelling. And so prior to this, I was mostly doing big projects, working with our investigative teams, talking about what the digital presentation looks like, what our social media plans are, how we can make our stories resonate with our readers, from everything from writing good web heads to thinking about different newsletter capabilities. And now, like everybody else, it's all coronavirus all the time. So, my average day begins with editorial meetings where we talk about story ideas, and everybody, sort of hits the ground running, and we talk about what we're going to email out to our audiences, how we're going to pitch them on social media, and then also how we're going to try to get their stories, because coronavirus is hard to report on because we're all sort of socially distant, which is not natural to reporters at all. And so we're trying to find different ways online that we can reach out to the audience and hear about what their experiences have been during this. And that has led to a lot of really great stories. I've been at the Globe for 7 years now. I started with the really glamorous role of part-time overnight web producer, and which was actually great, which it gave me the ability to know how everything runs across departments. And that actually has been super helpful for the job that I have now, where I could have a meeting with Katie and the sports editor 1 second, and then walk over and have an hour-long conversation about like a best TV show list. So things can, range widely. And actually the way I started at the Globe was kind of perfect for that. The weirdest thing that's happened during all this. So I'm a mom, I have 2 young kids. And so when we were sort of chatting on Zoom yesterday, this gang, I had to play Super Mario Brothers with my 5-year-old to keep him entertained so we could talk about this. So that was kind of strange. If you had told me like 3 months ago that I would be playing Mario during 9:15 editorial meetings with all the top management, I would have rolled my eyes. So there's been a lot of weird parenting moments in the middle of this pandemic. Cynthia, you're muted.
Sorry, Cease. At home snafus, the truck outside my house. Katie, quick intro would be awesome.
So, like Cynthia mentioned, I'm the assistant sports editor. I just started at the Globe in September, and I'm originally from Massachusetts. So talk about dream job. It's been very intimidating, but a really exciting time because in the past 7 months, obviously, Alex Cora has left as Red Sox manager. Tom Brady left. Gronk is back in Tampa. And so no shortage of news, which is hardly surprising for a city like Boston. So I graduated from Syracuse University in 2012. I did go to a J school. It cost me a lot of money. That kind of bothers me every month when I pay my student loans, and I just kind of deal with it. I actually started my career as a designer. That's what I did in college. I majored in journalism, but at the student newspaper, I focused on, I was laying out print pages, and my career took me to Iowa for a year, Oklahoma for 3 years, and Houston, Texas for 1.5 years. And all of those were design jobs. It was in Houston during Hurricane Harvey that I realized that I really wanted to be on the digital side of things. And so I started to shift my career and my focus and what I was working on and projects I took on. I then took a job as a producer in Philadelphia at the Philly Inquirer. And then when the Globe came calling, I decided to come home. So it has been a lot of travel, a lot of moving, a lot of really crappy apartments and no furniture and a lot of that, but it has been all worth it. And I love living in Boston. I love working in sports. Can't imagine doing anything else. It is as fun as you think it is. The funniest thing that happened, my boyfriend's in the other room, like the very first express desk call that we had on video when we went remote, he almost walked into the background in his underwear at like 8:30 in the morning. And so we had to set up new protocols right away where I was like, if I'm on a video call, I will expressly tell you, please do not do that. And so now every morning we have a routine. He's like, are you on there? Can I go? I'm just like, just put some clothes on. So it's like it was like out of a TV show funny. I'm still laughing about it. So that's been my funniest thing.
All right, Felicia, top that.
Hard to top. I am Felicia. I started at the Globe. It'll be 5 years next month, which is absolutely insane. I went to Boston University. I did study journalism, and I graduated from there in 2017. I was super active on the school newspaper there. The Daily Free Press was like my home away from home. I do joke that the Daily Free Press and the Boston Globe are where I got my degree, and BU is just the name that's on my degree. I feel like I did most of my learning in journalism from doing journalism, and I feel like most of you could probably agree with that. I started the Globe in 2015 as a city desk co-op, and so city desk, being a city desk co-op is basically just journalism boot camp. For any former co-ops on here who know that, you could end up doing 6, 7, 8 stories a day, police blotters, breaking news. Now it's a lot of coronavirus news as well. Our co-ops are handling everything right now, from our business co-op who's putting together lists of companies doing layoffs and furloughs, all the way to our metro co-ops, we have a metro co-op who's literally handling all of the main reporting every single day. So being a co-op was just like that for me, but minus the coronavirus coverage. You really kind of get your hands on a lot of the big stories of the day. From there, I worked part-time for the Globe for a while I was finishing school. And then my first job out of school was working overnights at the Globe. So I did overnights full-time for 1.5 years. I was nocturnal, and it was incredibly difficult, but I made it through. And then in October 2018, I started on the marijuana beat. And like Heather said, it's coronavirus all the time now. And so our jobs have changed a lot, and I can talk a little bit about that after. But the last couple months have obviously changed many, many things. Funniest thing that's happened to me is probably, my fiance is also a reporter. He works at the Boston Herald, and we have had to figure out, because we live in a fairly small apartment, we had to figure out when we're both on interviews how to not overlap and not to make the sound get in the way of each other's interviews. And so our solution has been that he goes in the bathroom and shuts the bathroom door, and he does interviews on our bathroom floor, which actually has great acoustic sound. But I've commandeered the kitchen table and he has me in the
bathroom. Great, thank you. So one of the questions we got over and over again from you guys was, how are we staying motivated to keep covering a really hard story? It's really hard for anybody trying to work from home in any industry, but the difference is you can kind of take a break if you're not a journalist. If you are a journalist, you're doing this 24 hours a day, as some of you heard, with pets and children and partners. So I just like to ask you guys, how are you staying motivated mentally, professionally, in what's a really hard and a really long story arc here? Deanna, I think you'd be a great person to kick it off. You've covered some really heavy stuff that cannot have been easy. I'd love to hear a little bit about how you've done it.
Yeah, so as I mentioned before, well, even before this crisis started, I was mostly doing news feature stories, which typically take, a couple of days to develop. Sometimes, the bigger type of narrative feature, which I would work on maybe for like a week, week and a half at a time. The pace of work and kind of what we're putting out has increased significantly. When I think I have written more stories just in the past 2 months than I have, just maybe in the past, even before this, like the 6 or 7 months until from when I started. It's just been an incredible amount of work. And the time pressure to come out with stories very quickly is insane, just because the situation is evolving so rapidly. There were times where, especially at the beginning of this, where I would write a story about, I don't even know, some type of treatment or testing protocol, and within like 5 hours when it would be edited, it would be out of date. The information would be old. So it's a lot of work. And I think at the beginning of this, when I was realizing that I was starting to feel a little bit burnt out, I couldn't stop, staring at Twitter and like doom scrolling and kind of spiraling into these sort of, wow, everything is sort of terrible, but this is my job to keep up to date with all of the terrible things that are happening. I kind of realized that I needed to, for my own mental health and to be able to sustain myself and the work that I'm doing, kind of learn to be a little more forgiving, which for me has meant realizing that, there are only so many hours in a workday that I should be contributing. So trying, as much as I can to kind of step away from Slack, step away from email, especially in the evenings and on the weekends. And to realize that, it's okay that I'm feeling tired, that I'm feeling exhausted, that my editors, have been very understanding, because we're all going through this. You're allowed to forgive yourself a little bit. We're all under an incredible amount of stress, not just from the work we do, but in our personal lives. And, you should be a little easy on yourself right now. I know there were a lot of memes coming out in the beginning of this about Shakespeare writing King Lear or something like that during quarantine in the 1600s. You don't have to do that, and you shouldn't be expected to do that. I think we're all trying to do, the best we can here, and and that is being, recognized, across the newsroom. We're not superhuman, so don't forget that.
That's an excellent point. Heather, what I'm going to throw to you on the same point is, we're now more than 2 months almost into this, and it can feel like it's a lot of the same stories sometimes. How has your team and how have you worked to find new angles on a story that's starting to feel familiar, to keep readers coming back and keep readers engaged?
Yeah. So with this, like everything else, we keep a really close eye on the data of what people are interacting with. And so that can mean sometimes just straight up page views, but also engage time. What do people spend more time on? What do they come back for? And so we've been able to really early, we noticed that people were really, really interested in coronavirus coverage. And that was one of the first, I think, steps towards us as a newsroom being like, oh, wow, we really need to be, remember how like 2 months ago, it just felt like this was something far off. And so once we realized that people were really consuming the content, we were like, okay, we're gonna dig into this more. Not because we chase page views, our business model is subscriber based, so we really are sort of free from that constraint, but more because every single day our readers come to the site and they vote on what they want us to cover. And that is a blessing in a way, because then we're able to really dig in and follow it up. So we still find that people are really interested in coronavirus. The news cycles have changed within the news cycle. So, in the beginning, it was trying to figure out what it is. People wanted to know what it is, where it came from. Then people started consuming how to prevent it. And then it was a lot of very servicey stuff. We put out some call outs asking people what they wanted us to write. And we followed up on a lot of those stories. I think that one of the most important things that you can do as a journalist is try to be an ideas machine, and that helps, that helps your colleagues, because we're not doing this alone. I don't have to come up with story ideas alone. The gang on this call, we all have meetings regularly to kind of bounce story ideas off of each other. And so the camaraderie that's missing while I'm home alone, we're trying to recreate and talk about it. And talking really helps, and reading everything you can that other people are doing. I think Felicia, you said this yesterday when we were talking, is that like it's somewhat easier to cover in a way because we're all living it, and so a lot of times like what we're feeling can be universal. But then you just want to make sure that you're not just writing from like only your perspective. Like I am privileged, I am home, I can work remotely, and so trying to make sure that you're broadening it out all the time. I don't know if that exactly answers it, but like following the news cycle, following the data, reading what other people are doing, and talking to each other and supporting each other, because the onus is never on just one person to come up with these ideas.
It is interesting to have seen, looking at the metrics, how the interest has remained, but how there's been, we keep hearing there are different stages of how we're all feeling about this, and you can absolutely see it in the readership in terms of what people flock to 1 week or 1 month, and then a few weeks later, that's not the story or the trending idea of the day. That's great, thank you. So let's talk about job changes. Journalists tend to be flexible and probably do a lot of different things over the course of their career. These guys have, but coronavirus has kind of brought that to a new level. So if you cover sports or you cover marijuana and COVID hits, suddenly your entire world is kind of on hold. So I'd love to hear from Katie, first you, and then Felicia, a little bit about what happens when that all turns upside down.
So it's really interesting, and something that I always tell students when I talk to them is, if you want to work in sports, you can't be a one-trick pony. Your job is not just covering baseball games. And that really has never been more true than it is right now. On a beat, you'll be expected to cover crime if a player gets arrested. There's going to be politics involved if, I don't know, a team owner ships in millions of masks from China on a team plane, or gets involved in some sort of stadium build or something like that. There's lifestyle, there's features, there's everything that goes into this, and really covering sports is about people in the end, the people who play the games, but it's really about their personalities and why we care about them. So I think that our team and myself, we've really had to ramp up that understanding that there are things that are bigger in life than playing games, and kind of find out like where we fit in this ecosystem. And so that's really meant that, our Celtics reporter is calling somebody, a Celtics fan in Italy, who he met one time when the Celtics fan came to Boston. And this was in early March, talking about what it's like there and giving us an insight from just a regular person. It's meant that our reporters need to really track down information about cancellations and when things are going to come back, and kind of having a really strong understanding of what are the government restrictions put in place, and what does that mean for a hockey team that wants to start practicing again. It's really just kind of put on display that you need to be well read, that you need to stay up with the news, and that you can't kind of put your head in like a silo and just say that you're only going to care about sports. And it's also forced us to become even better idea people than I think our team is really, really good with ideas, but even being better about that, because to Heather's point, we're trying to figure out what people want to read. And we do see that people are interested in something that kind of not really gives them a break, but something that is, a little bit different than the type of constant news coverage about these deaths and this disease. But what does that mean? Are they interested in, looking back at things? Are they interested in are people interested in reading about players and what they're doing? And so it's been a fun experiment. I mean, it's the kind of thing that, we wouldn't have had the time to do a lot of stuff that we're doing now that we're very proud of, because we were expecting to jump right into a baseball season and the NHL and NBA playoffs. And so when those are gone and we kind of have to put our skill on display, it's been really interesting and fun to observe. But it is just, for you guys as aspiring journalists, it's just a really good reminder that if you want to make sure you're employable, that you have to show that you're well-rounded, and you have to do the work to make sure that you are well-rounded, because you never know what might happen. Where this morning they opened up golf courses in Massachusetts. That's a politics story. It's a recreational sports story. It's got the governor. It's got all these other people involved. And it's really important for me in my role to understand how things are working on our news desk, how the governor has been answering questions, what he's been dealing with, who he's been hearing from, so that I can make sure that our coverage is as well-rounded as possible, so that people get the full story from the Globe and they don't have to go elsewhere for that information. And that's what we try to provide to our readers.
I'm glad you brought up the golf. That's kind of consumed our morning. So a lot of people very happy that the golf courses are open, and there's a lot of people very angry that the golf courses are open.
My dad is very happy right now.
Felicia, I'd love to hear about how you guys conceived of Coronavirus Now, the newsletter that we talked about, and how that's evolved as we've all been stuck at home for a couple months now.
Yeah, so Heather could speak more to how it was conceived. I was handed this beautiful template that she created. But it was funny because when it was handed to me, it was, I think, March 10th. It was like a day or two before we started working remotely. And at the time it started as Jason Toohey, who's at the head of Express Desk, being like, want to just write this newsletter today and we'll see what happens from here on out. And I was like, oh yeah, I could do an extra newsletter today. And it turned into such an animal. And it really was kind of hearing from readers and seeing what they like. And the more people were signing up for it, the more we were seeing that people were not only signing up, but also actually opening it in large numbers and actually clicking on links in there in large numbers. And the more emails I was actually getting from readers about questions that I would post, it was making me realize how much of a vital asset it really was for a lot of people that don't want to watch or read the news all day, and they really just want a dose in the afternoon of news. They just want to understand what happened that day and then be able to turn it off and move on. And that's kind of what this has been for people. It's much longer than I think we originally intentioned, because we had no idea how much news was going to be coming out of this. I think in the beginning we thought, we'll have some breaking news stories every day and we'll have some enterprise stories. And just the more this grew, I mean, everyone, like Katie said, it goes on every beat. And so even reporters that are generally sticking to their beat, like we have 3 people on the marijuana team. One of our reporters has mostly stuck to marijuana coverage because there's a ton to cover when it comes to recreational shops being closed, medical dispensaries incorporating new delivery services launching. In the midst of this, a cannabis commissioner decided to resign. Like, it's just, there's a ton happening even outside of coronavirus world, and figuring out how to weigh those things has definitely been challenging but fun. I think Katie could relate to this, in that you can't drop what was already happening. You can't, when Tom Brady announces he's leaving, you can't be like, yeah, we knew that was happening anyway, but coronavirus is more important. You do have to report on the things that people want to hear about that aren't coronavirus related. And so we've tried to do a little bit of that with marijuana. I do a daily marijuana newsletter as well, and I've been continuing that. It's obviously much shorter than Coronavirus Now, but it's something to kind of keep the industry abreast of what's happening, and acknowledge that there is news outside of coronavirus world. But it definitely has been, it's a matter of being flexible and kind of changing what you do and just rolling with the times, and also making it all fit in a single workday still. Trying not to do too many jobs at once.
All right, that's great. So I'm mindful of time, so let's move on to kind of the next part of our plan here, which I hope will be sort of the fun part, where we can offer you guys some suggestions and hopefully some advice. So I'm gonna kind of ask the whole group, what is the best advice, because this question came up a lot, that you can give to journalists and aspiring journalists about what it's going to be like to graduate in a tough market, or those that are facing cancellations of internships or work experience. What's the advice you have for them of how to cope with that and how to keep persevering in this industry even in a tough time? So let's, Heather, why don't you go ahead and start?
Sure. So I also graduated in a really tough economy. I got out of J school in 2007, which was when we started to see the bottom fall out of journalism, and it was horrific. And so I had this shiny, as Katie mentioned, expensive degree, and nothing really to do with it. So I ended up I had to take a detour into academia for a few years. And so the advice that I have is, even if you're not doing journalism, even if you end up having, like I did, not the luxury of just, working for free all the time, having to make an income, find things that you can do within those roles that would be transferable. And so I worked in communications for a little while, and I sent, emails to, I worked in an alumni office. I sent, mass emails to the alumni team. And I just, used that, put that on my resume. And those were things that actually helped me get the job at the Globe. I managed a website. I sent, newsletters, e-newsletters. I, did design. I did some editing of, small, low level stuff, but it was all sort of transferable. And so I think that, that was really helpful. And now actually it's been really helpful that I have a background in from a fundraising department, because journalism really wants to fundraise a lot more. So things that I thought were going to be useless to my long-term career goals ended up being really helpful. So just like looking for opportunities, and no matter what you end up doing immediately after school, don't think that that's the one thing that you're going to have to do forever. That would be my advice.
Let me just follow up with that quickly. So you got all this great sort of related experience. How did you, practically speaking, translate that to when you applied for a job at the Globe or applied for other jobs, to say, hey, listen, I don't necessarily have a ton of published clips from the last year, but I have all this other stuff. What did you, this is a while ago, of course, but like, do you remember a little bit about how you kind of sold that alternative resume?
Yeah. Well, first, it was easier because I wasn't applying for a writing job. And so I was applying for a web producer job. And whenever I talk to college students, I apologize, because the path that I have to the role I have now doesn't exist anymore. People actually want to be web producers now. And 7 years ago, they did not. So the competition, I think, is a little harder. But, when you look at the job description online, and, things like being able to, work within a content management system, to work within an email service provider, those sort of things were things that the Globe was looking for. 7 years ago, our boss would say, hey, if you have time, put something on Facebook tonight. So things were definitely different back then than they are now. But if you're looking for web producer engagement experience, being able to work within a, edit a website, work on the fly, talk about how you deal with stressful situations, because that's really important. So, read through the job descriptions and then think about the things that you've done, even in internships or at, your school paper or whatever, and use that on your resume. And then when you talk, if you get an interview, just talk that stuff up. And I talked it out with the person who interviewed me, and he and I still work together on a very daily basis.
I'm going to jump to Katie on this question, because I feel like you mentioned right at the beginning the importance of having great ideas. No matter what part of journalism you want to get into, ideas really matter. And I thought of that when Heather was speaking, because Heather's another person who always has fantastic ideas. Can you just touch a little bit on that, and then obviously offer up any other advice that you want to in terms of the importance of that as you're trying to sell yourself?
Yeah, so I think as I continue on in my path, I realize more and more every day, every year, that like ideas really are make or break. And I think I really kind of came upon that through my own reading. When I would find myself drawn to certain types of stories, and I'd wonder, like, why is this New York Times story so good? Or, before I worked at the Globe, like, why is this story so good? And it boiled down to the fact that I had never read anything like that. It was looking at a part of something that we, hadn't really been informed about before. A great piece of advice I got like a few years ago at this convention, I don't even remember what it was like a conference or something. And the woman who gave it to me, actually, I got to work with her when I was in Houston, and now she's like an enterprise editor at the Tampa Bay Times. But she always talked about, when you're writing, you want to focus on going a mile deep and an inch wide. If we're going to do a story, you don't want to try to cover everything. You want to try to cover just one thing very specifically. And I loved that, because it kind of taught me that there will always be another angle to the story when you're working on it. And so, you know, you take, for example, the NFL draft going remote. Of course, we will cover that. We'll cover that the same way that we always cover a draft, but what angle can we dive in deeper on? And that's what we're working on now. Is it about the home lives of coaches? Is it about how players will prepare to get ready for the season? You know, another great piece of advice that professor gave me that I love is when breaking news happens, to sit down and write the 10 things you're wondering about first and see which ones of those can turn into story ideas. And all of this is just going to say that, and again, like Heather, I didn't come from a writing background. I didn't try to be a reporter, and sometimes I wish I had, but I do think that I got through my path the way that, you know, it was meant to be. And I appreciate where I am, and I prefer being an editor. But the whole reason I said that was, of course, that's my train of thought. When it comes down to it, the way that you can differentiate yourself is the types of stories you write. You can write a story really well, but if it's a boring topic, no one's going to read it, and analytics back that up, like our common sense backs it up. And so it really, as aspiring journalists, I'd really push you guys to consider, if you're embarking on a project, to really boil it down and toss it around to people, talk to people who aren't journalism students, who aren't people who read the news all the time, and what are they interested in? I call on my non-journalism friends all the time to ask them what they're talking about. I have a best friend who's a social worker. She's studying at getting her grad degree at BC, and I have been on the phone with her all the time asking her, what are her friends saying in grad school? What are her clients saying? What are her bosses saying? Because, you know, we can't pretend to be experts on everything as journalists. The point is to present that expert information through our interviews and through our research and our work. And it's really good to get outside that bubble. And that's where I kind of find some of the best story ideas, is talking to people who do not care about certain sports topics, but want to know really desperately, like, how is this working? How does this happen? And then I realized, like, well, if they have those questions, I think our readers might too. So let's start to work on that and kind of take a step back and think, like, what do people really want to know?
So let's get, and I want to hear from you, Deanna and Felicia. Let's get really specific. We're in the middle of a pandemic. The job market is not great. Even freelancing gigs, which a month or two ago might have been available, are sort of drying up because news organizations are getting really tight with money. What advice do we have for people that are getting ready to graduate, or they're saying, is journalism going to be a practical path? How do I get experience right now in this insane situation? I don't know if one of you wants to grab that.
Sure, I can talk about that. On the not necessarily a positive side, but, you know, the way in which journalism and journalists are kind of suffering, the way in which our industry is contracting, you know, we're not alone here. Even, for example, I just have been working on a story about resident doctors who are training to become specialists at, you know, these different teaching hospitals. You know, even medical residents, they're finding out that their jobs, these contracts they've been offered before this pandemic started, have suddenly evaporated because hospitals are bleeding money. So, you know, we're in the same boat as so many other professionals and people who are working, who are suddenly finding that, you know, the job that they thought was kind of like going to be the stable career path isn't really there anymore. So you're not alone. Also, you know, I would use this opportunity, if you could, especially if your internships that you originally signed up for have been canceled, to kind of work on some of those concrete skills that make journalists good at their jobs. For example, reading as many books as you can just on the craft of writing and the craft of journalism. You know, going through stories, for example, like something I used to do on the Pulitzer website, especially in the features category. I would read a bunch of old ones and try to analyze, you know, what made them so good, and really break them down in a granular way to figure out why this was, you know, such good work, and, you know, what lessons could I use from that and apply to my own writing. And I pulled up two of my favorite books on writing. One is this one on Writing Well by William Zinsser. Will teach you all about the power of strong verbs and why adverbs are not good, among other things. And then this piece is kind of a compendium from different really good narrative writers called Telling True Stories from the Harvard's Nieman Foundation. Again, really good perspective on how to write really, really compelling stories if that's something that you're interested in. In the meantime, while right now things are largely under lockdown and the journalism industry is going to look different, months from now, and the job market will be, incredibly more competitive. Stick with it in terms of, contacting those editors who originally reached out to you and hired you. 3 months from now, say, hey, this is what I've been working on, or here are some ideas that I've come up with that I think you guys could be working on. Or is there anything, any way I could start, the summer internship I would have done and maybe do it in the fall or the winter, let editors know that you are still available, that you're still looking for work, and be not super persistent about it, give them some breathing room. We're all really busy, but, continue to check up on, your mentors, the people who have hired you in the past, the people you've interviewed with, and maybe they didn't hire you, but still thought you were a great candidate, and continually look for those opportunities.
Yeah, just to add on, definitely utilize those relationships. I mean, anyone that you've met in person, anyone who, when you bounce into their inbox, they will recognize your name, that you're not just a random cold call. Utilize those relationships. Ask what they're up to. Ask if they need any help with anything. One idea, if you have lost your internship this summer, if you're looking for things to do, reach out to journalism professors, see if they're working on anything outside of class. For a lot of professors in particular, they don't work over the summer and they don't teach over the summer. And so they do often use the summer to get ahead in professional projects they're working on, whether it be a book or just research for a proposal for a book. Sometimes they do need a fact checker or a researcher for those, and that would be a great thing to put on your resume. And if not journalism, I mean, Heather talked about kind of all of the different jobs you can get where the skills really are transferable. So find something else where the skills are transferable. I actually saw somebody tweet the other day about contact tracers for coronavirus and how journalists would be perfect at being contact tracers because they are really good at figuring out the nitty-gritty of a person's life. And as funny as that is, it's also, I mean, it's a really important job right now, and it truthfully is very transferable, and it really would look good on a resume. So get creative. It's always better to keep busy than to not be doing anything. And so if you can't find something in journalism, well, don't let that keep you from doing anything. Just find something to stay busy. And get clips. I think that the best thing that I did in college was I didn't love the idea of doing unpaid internships, and I stayed away from them as much as I could. But if you find one that isn't very time consuming, if you find one that it's going to be, one or two stories a month or 5 hours a week, and you can work it in while also doing paid work, that's a really good way to get extra clips. And that is one thing that I did my senior year of college, was do some unpaid work while also doing paid work, just to kind of build up your portfolio and to have something to show for yourself at the end of however long this goes on.
I'm just going to add one more to that point. As a little bit of a harried editor who gets a lot of emails from students along the way, one thing you mentioned, staying in touch with editors, I think it's an awesome idea. When you write to them, remind them who you are, because they probably have talked to a lot of students. And so, hey, we met last year at XYZ conference, or we talked a few years ago when you were on a panel, something that reminds them, because editors really want to stay in touch with journalists over the year. Maybe you're not right to hire now, but you could be in 3 years. So continuing that relationship is an awesome idea, provided that you keep sort of jogging their memory, because editors are old and busy and might not remember. So that's always something to remind people of. Okay, so let's jump to some of your questions. You guys submitted some terrific questions, and I just want to get through some of them, and then if we have a few minutes left at the end, we might go back to some more advice here. So the first one I saw that I thought was a really interesting one from one of you guys is the question of what advice can you give to a young reporter who is covering a story like this and wants to get experience and is excited about it, but also feels like this is a really invasive story, and it's talking to people at a time when they're scared, when situations are outside their control. How do you approach that, and what's the best way to do that while still feeling like you're a decent person? Deanna, I feel like you're made for this because you've talked to people in all sorts of tough circumstances.
Yeah, and this the job of journalists, and what we do, especially in terms of talking to people who are in really difficult situations, who've experienced unbelievable amounts of trauma. That's nothing new. It's kind of par for the course, especially if you are. I mean, look at all the stories that journalists have done on mass shootings. So many of these, like, for example, police shootings that we've had recently, journalists writing about, rape and sexual assaults. It's part of the job, and part of our job is to, ask questions in a way that would normally be, for anyone else, extremely intrusive. For me, my rule of thumb is to always remember that I am a human first and a journalist second, which means to treat the people that I'm talking to as people, not as subjects necessarily, or sources for my kind of use and exploitation, I guess, but to realize that they are, going through something, extremely hard. And many of them, regardless of their situation, the trauma that they've experienced, want to talk about it. They want to feel listened to. Obviously, you'll hear people who, have, privacy issues and they don't want to go on the record. That's fine. That's your job to, as a human being first, respect those decisions. But the vast majority of times when I've been working on, really sensitive stories, the people who I've come across, if you kind of, appeal to them, with, why you think the story is important, why it would be a public service for other people to learn about, for other people to know, appeal to their own sense of justice, their own sense of, this is why, this is how I can play a part to get this really important story out there. Most of the time, I think folks are really receptive to that. And part of that process is, being patient, being a really good listener, and, talking, even, humanizing yourself a little bit too. Sometimes I'll find myself, in, especially doing really sensitive interviews, talking about my own, experiences with trauma, or even in this coronavirus crisis, the ways in which, my own family is dealing with, so much uncertainty too. And I think, sources really appreciate that kind of, that human connection. So, always remember that that's sort of what makes our jobs really, it's such a privilege to be able to tell these people's stories, and part of that just means, they will be difficult stories, and you have to treat them with kind of the respect, and sensitivity and compassion that they deserve.
Another good one here. How do you guys think that journalism is going to change in the long run because of COVID? We're going into a very, very long story here. This is not a quick thing that we'll remember back as a week's coverage. Katie, I think I'm going to kick that to you because I'm curious if you think sports is going to be particularly impacted.
Yeah, I have, this is something we've talked a lot about as our group of sports editors. A crucial part of sports journalism, and a lot of other areas too, but especially for us, is access. Getting one-on-ones, getting in a room with a person. So much of what our best work comes from is not a press conference, but a one-on-one conversation with a clubhouse assistant or an assistant coach about their kids or their family. That's how we build sources. And especially in sports reporting, where teams want to hold back information, we need to work around the edges and find other ways to verify it. And so we're very curious to see what happens next, because a lot of places, I think, even work, like actual work environments, like we see that remote work can work. Like, this does kind of suck sometimes to work remote, but you understand why, it's okay, it's not that bad, and I'm happy to be safe at home, and I feel lucky to be safe at home. And so, what happens when baseball comes back maybe in a few months, and reporters have to do everything over video? Well, that means that the control for the flow of information goes to the teams and not to us, and that is really concerning. And so it'll be interesting to see how we proceed. And I think there's a lot of advocacy organizations, in addition to the strength of the Globe, that will be working on those situations. And to a broader point, I think that journalism, really hasn't faced this type of long running story where we have to balance the immediate breaking news with the, what does this mean? And there's no roadmap for coronavirus. There's nothing, this isn't like a presidential election. This isn't like a political cycle. This isn't like anything like that. And so it's really going to be interesting to see how news organizations respond. And I'm grateful to be at a place like the Globe because I know that we have the resources to cover this story long-term and short-term, and it does make me very sad for other places for papers that are owned by larger companies, or they continue to see cuts and furloughs, where it's really hard to sustain this type of work. I mean, we've had a lot of people who have been able to cycle through on the breaking news so that it's not the same person every single day to have to deal with all of this, especially in the beginning in March, where it was like, what is even going on? And so I think that it will really require like journalism organizations, like actual news outlets to, really rethink how they approach the day-to-day. And in my opinion, I think it's going to be a great push in the right direction for us to start thinking, about these deeper, what does it mean stories, and force news organizations to sort of put that at the forefront, which I think a lot of smaller organizations still kind of rely on that daily print cycle to determine how they work and what they do. And that's not really going to be the situation anymore. And so, I hope places aren't smaller when they come out of it. I mean, some are going to be, and it took a really long time for places to start hiring back after the recession in 2008 to 2010. And so it'll take some time, but on an optimistic note, a lot of like the places that people want to work in sports is places like The Athletic, other websites, like those places didn't exist 5 years ago. And so who knows what it's going to look like in 5 years, what kind of places will pop up. Nonprofit news outlets, places like the Globe are going to be strong. And so if you look at the landscape now and you get scared, know that it looks a lot different from when I graduated like 8 years ago. And I am always amazed by that. And so, things will change too. Hopefully they change for the better. We'll see.
I've also seen a silver lining in covering local and state politics, and I think that it's going to force agencies to make things remote capable, even if, there obviously, we will have in-person meetings again, that will come back at some point, but I think it's been great to not have to go to every single meeting in person. The Cannabis Commission for the state recently moved to Worcester, and they in the past had sporadically been live streaming it. It often was left up to a nonprofit group that we would rely on to just be live streaming it if we weren't going in person. And especially being in Worcester, it takes time. I live in Medford. My colleagues also live in Eastern Mass. It was a waste of time for us to be driving all the way out there and driving all the way back if we could do the meeting in person. And a meeting just happened this morning. It was on Microsoft Teams or whatever, and it was super easy. They have a press avail that's going on right now that one of our reporters is at. They found a way to make all of this work. And I think that seeing that transparency is being built hopefully will last beyond coronavirus, and that is one silver lining to at least get out of this.
All right, so as we come to a close here, I'd love to hear just very quickly, Heather, maybe you can field this one. Parting words of advice for getting through tough points in your career. You said you've been through some tough cycles, and I'm sure a lot of aspiring journalists are feeling kind of frustrated now. So what's the best way to sort of keep their spirits up and know that this is a good industry to be in, even if it takes a little bit of a different path?
Yeah, I mean, I think that that's a hard one. Like, I think that when you're younger, you think that your career is going to sort of happen in a straight line. And after you do it for a decade or two, you realize like, oh shit, this is nothing like I thought it was going to be. And oh my God, I can't believe I'm so lucky to work with the Boston Globe. I didn't think that was going to happen. So I think just like, trying to have faith that like, life is weird and you're going to get to places that you didn't think you were, and then feel really lucky about it, hopefully. Like I was saying earlier, is that like, I did a lot of jobs after going to Columbia that I didn't think that I was going to have to do, and it ended up working out for the best. And so it's not always the case. Journalism, as Katie was talking about, is going to change. Things are going to be different. This was already going to be a hard year for journalism. The business model is not super sustainable. people are asking a lot for subscriptions. As we enter into a recession or depression, it's going to be really weird. So I'm not going to pretend that like, oh, it's all going to work out, be chipper. But just, you know, I think just like looking for the silver lining is the way you can kind of get through. I don't know if that seems too Pollyanna, but
No, I think that's a
right
real
now I
fair
need
point.
something good to hold on to.
We all do, we all do. Well, I don't want to keep people any longer because I know it's the middle of your day, you're busy. Thank you for joining us. And as you heard from all the panelists, stay in touch, whether it's with the people you see here, they're all easily findable on Twitter and online, or other people that you've met along the way. It's a really good way to keep your foot in things and to you know, continue to develop contacts and expertise. So please don't hesitate to reach out. Also, this event was recorded and will be sent out to anybody who was registered. So if you stepped away or you didn't catch it all, it should be in your inbox. So thank you so much and best of luck, everyone. Bye-bye.
Good luck.